Hi everyone, today I'm going to talk about my twin birth story. As always, if you're new to my channel, I do recommend that you go back to my very first video, which is kind of an overview of my whole pregnancy story. It's kind of a general summary of events. And I've got some other videos on how we were diagnosed with Twin Anemia Polycythemia Sequence, our in utero transfusions, and that leads me to today's video. For those of you that didn't want to go back and have a look at my previous videos, just a really quick summary. My husband and I got pregnant through IVF in November of 2022. Then we didn't find out it was twins until 13 weeks pregnant, and at 22 weeks gestation, my bubs were diagnosed with Twin Anemia Polycythemia Sequence. Unfortunately, my mum passed away in that same week, which is a story for another video. We had 2 in utero transfusions for the babies to save their lives, and that leads me to my birth story today. So I'm going to start this story at 32 weeks gestation. So we had just had a second in utero transfusion in theatre with an epidural at the Mater in Brisbane. So we had a scan after that, just at our regular hospital on the Gold Coast, and everything was fine. The in utero transfusion, or the second one, had worked really well. And then on that Saturday, we had collected some shopping. We'd done a normal kind of Saturday routine for us. Come to later that night, and I was just watching a movie. Like, I just noticed that the couch was wet. That's the only way I can describe it. And I just went, oh shit. And my husband, who was at the other end of the house, said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "I think my waters are broken." It was something that I just knew. I was secretly hoping that I had peed myself. So my husband and I packed everything in the car. So I already had a hospital bag ready to go. So we jumped in the car and we went to the maternity assessment centre at my local hospital. They did a few exams and discovered that yes, it was in fact amniotic fluid, and I was admitted straight away. I think that was about 10 o'clock on a Saturday night. And when we found out that it was amniotic fluid, we started texting around our family and said, "My waters are broken. I've been admitted to hospital." So at my hospital, it's a tertiary hospital. They have a lot of kind of registrars, or I guess doctors in training, that are doing the night shift. So there was a little bit of confusion as to what was going to happen. The registrar that was looking after me consulted with another doctor, and they said, "No, we're not going to deliver if she's got no other signs of labour," which I didn't. I was just admitted to the ward, and they would decide what to do with me the next day. Now, when your waters break, they start giving you antibiotics as a precaution because you're prone to infection, or your bubs are prone to infection. So that's what happened with me. They started me on some antibiotics, and I think that was the only medication that they gave me. So during my stay in hospital, there was quite a bit of confusion about what to do with me. As I've mentioned, TAPS is a very, very rare condition. There was a lot of information in my file. I think some of the doctors were confused about what should happen in this situation. So I really, really had to advocate for myself. Now, I did have my maternal fetal medicine department, but I didn't have direct access to them. So I kept asking the doctors who were doing the rounds to consult with them. You know, could you please just consult with them? They will know what to do. The plan, the babies would be delivered by a maternal fetal medicine doctor, and it would be planned as much as possible. What we wanted to avoid was a kind of a middle of the night emergency C-section. In that particular hospital, their most experienced doctors and neonatologists are not on staff during the middle of the night. So every doctor I was speaking to, I was encouraging them to plan the baby's delivery and make sure that we had maternal fetal medicine on hand, as well as neonatologists to look after my babies. But even though I was doing that, there was still a lot of confusion. I got to about Tuesday morning. So I had been in hospital since the Saturday night. It had now come to Tuesday morning. I said to one of the doctors, what's going on. Has my C-section been booked? Is maternal fetal medicine on hand? Are the neonatologists ready? Are there NICU beds for my bubs? And that doctor, so by this time I'd had 4 different doctors, and this 4th doctor said to me, "Oh yeah, we've got your C-section booked and it's on Thursday." And I said, "Again, is it with MFM? Are there NICU beds for my babies?" "No, it's just booked with the normal, like on the normal roster. So you'll just go on the list in the morning. So you're definitely down for the day. They usually do the C-sections in the morning and it's just with one of the regular registrars." And I immediately said, "No, that's not going to work. I have twins who are high risk. I need to speak to someone about this." I actually told them to ring my doctor at the Mater to consult with him because I didn't feel like they were listening to me at this point. She started to take me seriously. Now they went away and within a half an hour and said, "You're right, we don't have MFM booked for you and we don't have NICU and special care beds for your babies. So we're going to have to send you to the Mater. You're going to have to start fasting and we're organising transport for you as we speak." Now that was really scary. I didn't mind going to the Mater because they knew me, they knew my babies, they had all my records. That wasn't the issue, but it is an hour away from my house compared with the Gold Coast, which is only about 15 minutes drive away from my house. You could probably get there in 10 minutes on a good drive. So it was really scary, the prospect of having to deliver away from home and then also having my babies in NICU at another hospital so far away from home. I didn't know how I was going to navigate that. So obviously it was a very, very emotional time for me. There were a lot of tears, but I just had to pull myself together, do the fasting and wait around for the transport. So I actually didn't get transported to the Mater until about 6 o'clock that night, which means I didn't actually get there because of the traffic until maybe at 8:30 at night. The doctor on the rounds that night didn't understand why I shouldn't just have the C-section then and there. He didn't understand why I should wait even another day. And I was pretty hangry. I was pretty emotional. I was being poked and prodded. I had CTGs. I had everything hanging out of me. They were taking my blood. They were doing swabs, which is all things that I went through only a couple of days prior at the Gold Coast. So yeah, it was a really, really frantic time and I was extremely stressed out, and that's when I started having contractions. I was also left in a room on my own for really long periods of time because I was in pregnancy assessment centre. They're really busy, and having those straps and cords and everything hanging out of you, it was really, really hard. As I was speaking to the doctor and he was saying, umming and ahhing about whether I should have a C-section then and there, I just told him to call Glenn Gardner immediately, which he did. And I'm so thankful for Glenn. He must have been having dinner or winding down on a Tuesday night. And he's picked up the phone and said, "No, we're going to wait until 34 weeks, which was in 2 days. Thankfully, I was sent up to the ward after a couple of hours. I tried to get some sleep. Now they're shared rooms at the Mater, so it's quite hard to get any sleep in that environment, but I did my best. The next morning, I was visited by a doctor in maternal fetal medicine, like straight away. I mean, they came up at probably 8 o'clock in the morning. They already had a plan, which was just beautiful and amazing. So their plan was to deliver me the next day. Wednesday's agenda, or that day's agenda, was for me to have a wellbeing scan in MFM at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And then on Thursday morning, I would have a C-section with a maternal fetal medicine doctor present. So with that information, I rang my hubby and said, "Have a good night's sleep." We are going to be parents tomorrow morning. So it came to 4 o'clock in the afternoon of that day. We had a wellbeing scan in maternal fetal medicine. They did a final weight of the bubs. Yeah, everything was fine. We discovered then that baby B, or my little Billy, her waters had broken and Poppy's had not. So only one of the baby's sacs had ruptured, which was really quite interesting. So with the confidence that the babies were doing okay, their heart rates were really good, aside from Billy having not much fluid left there, she still had enough. I was quite confident to go and have a good night's sleep. Now, I was told that I was going to have to fast, I think, from midnight. So I had a really, really good dinner. Like, I ate a lot, I think, at 6 o'clock, and I had planned to have another snack. The food is pretty good at the Mater. So I was going to have another snack at 8 o'clock to try and eat as late as I possibly could. So yeah, at 8 o'clock, I had my observations and a CTG, which was what they were doing with me anyway. I think they were doing that twice or 3 times daily. And I was expecting them to come at 8 o'clock. Towards the end of the pregnancy, I absolutely hated CTGs. I felt really pinned down and claustrophobic. I had 3 straps plus all the cord, and I had cannulas. I think I had 2 cannulas at that point because Marta wanted one in me, but they didn't want to remove the one from the Gold Coast. So I had one in each hand. I just felt like there were cords everywhere. And so I was telling them to hurry up. It was supposed to be 20 minutes, but I found at the Mater they're quite thorough. So they left it on me for quite a while. And it became apparent quite quickly that Billy's heart rate, or baby B, or the one whose sac had ruptured, her heart rate was really, really quite elevated. So I think it was about 180. And Poppy was sitting down at about 150 to 160 at max. So yeah, and Billy's just was not coming down. So I was staying on that CTG for a lot longer. At one point, I actually said to the midwife, can you just consult with a doctor and get me off this thing? I don't want to be on it anymore. And she went away, and all of a sudden, maybe about 5 minutes later, I had midwives, nurses everywhere. And the nurses were putting IVs, hooking me up to IVs and saying the baby's heart rate is too elevated. We need to try and get it down. Maybe you're dehydrated. So they were giving me fluids. And then a doctor appeared and said, where's your support person? And I said, oh, he's at home back on the Gold Coast because we're giving birth tomorrow. And then he said, your support person should be here. Maybe he should have got a hotel or something. And I was like, why does that matter? And he said, your baby's heart rate is too elevated and we need to deliver the babies now. And I burst into tears, like just bawling my eyes out. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I mean, I had a feeling because of all the chaos that was happening, but it was just all happening so fast. And I was still thinking, surely they can wait another less than 12 hours to deliver me. And with my husband not being there, obviously I was going to be alone. So I was freaking out. As the nurses were putting compression socks on me, they were putting cannulas or IVs in my arm and stuff like that. They were dressing me, undressing me. I was ringing my husband just repeatedly to get him to wake up. After a few phone calls, he eventually woke up and I told him what was going on. I had begged and pleaded with the doctor just to wait an hour, but he was like, no, they need to come now. And I said, oh, surely it'll be an hour before it all happens. And he said, no, once we start these things, your babies are going to be here in half an hour. After I told my husband and sent a couple of texts or messages saying that the babies were coming now to family members, I think by that stage I was probably already wheeled down to theatre. Now, when I was at theatre, every single person asks the same question. And of course, they ask you what you're having done today. And everyone's trying to calm you down. Thankfully, at the Mater, like they were really, really quite calm. I was extremely worried about having an emergency C-section. This was the last thing that any of us wanted. And my obstetrician had said, you do not want an emergency C-section with your high-risk babies. So I had that in my mind. I was really lucky that at the Mater, they have all their experienced doctors on a rotational roster. So there's no one inexperienced even in the middle of the night. So everyone was all over it. They knew what they were doing. So I'd made a playlist of about 45 minutes to cover the length of a C-section of songs that I wouldn't mind my babies being born to. It was kind of a list of my favourite songs that I can listen to all the time. So they were able to accommodate that. They put that on straight away. So I went in, I had the spinal, and that was absolutely brutal. It was probably the worst part of the procedure, to be honest. And even though I'd had an epidural only a couple of weeks before, that spinal was just absolutely horrible. It felt disgusting. Anyway, once that was done, it all kicked in very, very quickly. And before I knew it, I had to kind of process that my babies were coming. Like, I was just about to meet my baby girls. And in that moment, I had a really beautiful wave of calm wash over me, that I was just about to meet my baby girls. But I also had a lot of fear about what I was going to see when they came out. Were they going to cry? Were they going to be healthy? At that stage, they were just under 34 weeks. So we also knew that they were quite low in their birth weight. So I was scared. So all the things that they say about a C-section are true. It kind of feels like someone's rummaging around down there, and they kind of say big stretch, and then you feel like you're being stretched and pulled. And yeah, I was just talking to the anaesthetist while all this was happening. And then all of a sudden they said, pull the curtain down. And the first baby came out, and she was just beautiful. And she cried. It was the sweetest little cry I'd ever heard. It was just magic. And she was so little. And I said to her, hey, girlfriend. I was so happy that she was okay. And then they took her away and they put the curtain up. And then within a couple of seconds, they said, curtain down. And the second baby was here. And she cried as well. And she was so beautiful. I don't think anybody can really describe in words what that feeling is like. And seeing and hearing them cry was just the best thing in the world. And it was just me and them. Oh gosh, I didn't think I'd get so emotional talking about this. So after they were born, they told me what times they were born, what their weights were. And Lee ended up showing up, my husband, and he was able to go and see them and touch them and squeeze their hands as they were being cleaned up. And he was able to follow them to the NICU. What was really cute was after he saw them, he came back to me and he said, they're so beautiful. And he had a little tear in his eye, and it was just gorgeous. I just wish he had been there for it. But I'm so glad he made it in time to follow them to the NICU. So that's what he did while I was being stitched up. It was all a bit of a blur after that. So I went to recovery, and Lee came and met me down in recovery, and I'd had something to eat, and I was really keen to just get up to the NICU to see the baby girls. So after I'd been in recovery, they took me up I think it was about midnight. By this time, I was already experiencing quite brutal pain. So we saw the girls, I got to touch them. That was really just a blur. I barely remember it. But I got to touch them in their isolates. They said they were doing really well. So I didn't actually get to hold my babies, and it was separately the next day, probably about 12 hours after. They were placed in separate isolates and they were in different places in the room, so they weren't even together. Yeah, and that was quite brutal and it was very tough, but you know, all I was concentrating on was being with them. The great news is the next day they were already able to tell me they were only on CPAP. They didn't need any oxygen or anything like that. They were already on room air. So the girls were quite stable to begin with. I'm going to leave it there for today's video. I will have a part 2 to this, which is the aftermath of my birth story. Thank you so much for watching today. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Please stay tuned for part 2. And if you have any questions or comments, please pop them below and I'll see you at the next one.